Well, hello guys. We're here again, and it's another 3D Studio Max video from 28 Bay. Simple creations in 3D Studio Max, and we're using simple creations to get you started in 3D arts and design, making use of 3D Studio Max. In this video, we're going to be touching on the viewport navigation and scene navigation, basically guiding you through ways of manipulating your objects or getting around the scene. As a newcomer, the interface could pretty much be a little overwhelming, but I mean, it takes a little bit getting used to. But once you get it, it's quite simple and straightforward. So let's jump right in, and I have this open right here. All right, so if you're opening this for the first time, if you come to help, you find welcome screen. So this most likely will be what you see, at the very beginning. It has some tips and tricks here and there. So yeah, basically. So if you missed it, just jump into the help and you will find your welcome screen there. All right, so next will be the actual, I wouldn't say scene now, the actual interface. All right, so by default, you're gonna have 4 viewports. You have your top, your front, left, and perspective viewports. So basically what this, to break this down a little bit more, I'm just going to open my starter scene. All right, so basically this is just helping you view things properly, let me put it like that. So if you had this box and you were seeing it in perspective, this viewport allows you to see something directly from the top. And this viewport, they're all flat views, orthogonal views. As you can change them also from front to back, and left to right, and top to bottom. But basically it just helps you view things properly, and it's always nice to make use of all the views when you're creating stuff, just to make sure you have proper placements and alignment. So one of the few, or two of the few basic things you want to do in any application once you open any 3D application is to be able to transform, and also to be able to move around your scene. So first, to move around your scene, and second, to transform object. So first things first, the basic opening, I already showed you what you will find in the welcome screen. And of course, having this here now, I'm going to show you how to pan now. You're going to pan, orbit, and zoom. So pan is holding your middle mouse button, and that was also in the welcome screen. Told you I had some tips and tricks. All right, so if you look down here to the bottom right, you would also find that, and you would also find the orbit. The orbit is the same middle button, but you hold your Alt to orbit around. Okay, and you have your zoom also, which is this right here, and you could guess the middle mouse button, which is also your scroll, allows you to zoom. Okay, to second, let's manipulate or transform an object, which before I go forward, you could have full viewports, or you could just take this down to have the 4 of them. You could also zoom or extend, and this tool right here, viewports all at once, and something similar for the other ones around the object this time. All right, so that's for navigating your viewports. So for your select, select and move, select and rotate, and then select and scale. If you look towards the top, say left side of the screen, or somewhere around the middle, you have your I think select is not showing there, but that's your cue on the keyboard. So yeah, it has that light gizmo around it. So you have your select and move, and this allows you to move stuff around different axes. Something similar for the rotate, and finally the scale. Of course, there are other tools here that allows you to manipulate or transform objects more accurate easily, if you may. But those are kind of like your primary transform tools: select and move, select, rotate, and select and scale. All right, so let's move forward. Let's jump to the creation panel. That's to your right now, right side of the screen. So where you have this plus, it's your creation panel, and under that tab or panel, you have your geometries, you have your shapes, which represents your lines or splines, as 3D Max calls them, splines and knobs. Excuse me. You also have your lights and cameras, helpers, space warps, and systems. Basically, if I'm to reset my scene here, yep. So basically, I could come under the creation panel, and under each of the panels, you have other categories of primitives, basically, or objects, if you may. And let's see, let's create the box. And you don't always have conception from the start. You could just create it as easy as or as simple as you want, and simply manipulate it afterwards by shifting the parameters as you want. Since I want a box, I'm just going to make this even 30, 30, 30, and 30. And it says box here, but definitely you could make anything out of it. So let's undo. You have a cone. I'm going to click, drag the first base, the basic release, click, and at each step it allows you to change stuff. So you have your sphere, you have your geosphere, something similar, but the mesh structure is different. You have your cylinder, click, drag, release the mouse, click again, and you have a tube, torus, and so on and so forth, and the iconic 3ds Max teapot. All right, so these are kind of like basic stuff. I haven't manipulated anything. This is like default created items. Okay, so to there are other items here. Nice enough. They are even so you could just play around for you to see the kind of things they do. And if you do not understand what a particular item does, it's as easy as just googling it. So for example, if you come here and you see morph, scatter, or boolean, if you don't understand, just simply type it in Google, say for example boolean in 3D Studio Max, and that should YouTube is your friend, Google is your friend, so make it. All right, so on to other things. You have lines, and you could use this to draw shapes. yes, close. That's when you've gone round all the way through. You have circles. I'm going to draw this outside the plane, and so on and so forth. The application is, would I say easy or not complex, but um, the lovely part of using 3D Studio Max is once you're very much used to the interface and the whole creation, 3D creation process, you get to transfer that knowledge into other applications that you may want to use, and that's talking about applications like Cinema 4D, Maya, Houdini, and so on and so forth. So those are lines. I'm not going to create these other guys yet, but yes, you can touch in, and if you do something that gets you lost, just simply undo. All right, so talking about manipulation, I did mention you don't have to create things perfectly from the onset. So I can see this cone is not properly made. So I'm going to select, which is my W, select. I'm not moving it, but I'm going to jump to the next tab. You see here, which is the modify panel. So I'm going to select the modify panel while having the cone still selected, and if I scroll down, you could see that it has properties just for cone. So kind of like what you would find in the modify panel, mostly would have, they will be mostly contextual, so it's based on whatever it is you have selected. So I have my sphere selected here, and you'll notice that stuff has already changed. I have the geosphere, and yeah, stuff changed too. So I'm going to come back to the cone, and you notice that it has radius 1, most likely top or bottom, and radius 2, the other one. The height obviously is for the height, and I could just shift this around to know which is which. So this obviously is for the bottom. I could round it up to 40 and take this down to 0. Now these things are called spinners, so if you click and drag, it allows you to swiftly change the values right in, and if you right click, it zeroes it out. So this is what I mean by you do not have to have it perfect from the onset. So if I wanted a cone that looked pointed like this, I have it now, and you could change the amount of segments, and I could take this out to 3. You could see it looks like a sort of like a pyramid right now, and I could bring it back in. The more segments you have in your object, the smoother it becomes. Now note of warning, if you do not have a system that can take much stress, it's important for me to tell you that if you do not need that much segment, then don't create it. It's highly unnecessary, so take note. The more segments you have, especially when you start really populating your scene, then things will sort of like start getting heavy on your system. So, but truth be told, the system can handle quite a lot. So you could slice on, and I'd really advise or suggest you be adventurous when you try this application, or generally applications. Whenever you're learning, just learn to be adventurous and try things out, and if you don't like what you've done, just undo, and you're back to where you came from. So you could slice from auto, and do that. Well, of course, there's kind of like no sense in slicing the box, but different objects would have different properties. So if you look in this viewport right now, all objects do have segments, and like I said, the more for objects like the cone, the sphere, and things that need smoothness generally, the more segments you have in there, the more smoother it will look. So if you have this box here and you needed more segments, you could just crank that in, and you could see this from, let me take this up, you could see this from the orthogonal viewports. If you hit the Z key on the keyboard, it zooms in on whatever object or objects you have selected. So that's what I've done on these 3 viewports. I could do the same on the perspective. Now there's only one reason you're not seeing the edges or the lines or the segments in the perspective viewport, and that's because you have a shaded view in the perspective. Now to enable the edges, just so that you can see the segments, you can simply come here, default shading, right click on it, and you find edged faces. All you have to do is select it, and voila, you have that on your perspective viewport. And just for the item you've selected, this affects the viewport, so everything in that viewport will show the segments. So moving forward, coming back to the modify panel. So once you select an item, you have its properties right there in the modify panel. So if you want to add modifiers, and it's kind of like saying in Photoshop you're adding filters. So if you want to add modifier, you have a modifier list here. So all you have to do is drop it down, and you have different options of modifiers to work with. It comes into this stack that you have right here. So another thing to take note of is it's very likely for you to have a contextual list here. So what I'm saying in essence is what you will find in the list when you've selected an object like this might differ when you've selected, say for example, a line. So it might not be the exact same list of modifiers. Mostly because there are some modifiers that would work well on lines and definitely won't have an effect or a good effect on the object. So take note. So that's for your modifier list, and you have tons of them. And the good part is you can install. You could surf the web for either free plugins or paid plugins, and basically those plugins allow you to enhance your jobs or your art in different ways. So there are a ton of them. You could Google a couple of them if you want to, and but that's where the modifier list is, and you can click on any of them to apply to your object. So yeah. So what next? Now it would be, let me add something, but still let me remove it. Okay, so if you would like to see a wireframe view the way you have it in your orthogonal viewports right here, you can see it's not shaded. If you want the same kind of view in your perspective, you could just right click and say wireframe override, and this gives you a wireframe view. But nah. Alright, so other things you want to take note of is there's also something called the active shade, and basically what this what does is to sort of like actively not sort of, that's what it does, it actively renders your viewport as you walk. So if I move that just a little bit, and you would notice that it's going to remove the edged faces so that you see this clearly. You would notice that it's sort of like rendering stuff as I move it around. You would get a little bit more of that later, but for now let's just get back to now. The active shade is actively rendering what you're working on as you're working on it, so take note that this could also have a huge impact on your working. So take note of that. You don't want to just leave that on if you are not using it, but basically if your system cannot handle it, try not to just leave it on. Next, just give me 1 second. Okay, all right, so going through my lists, let's see. So we've touched on the modifier list. Now that we have several items in our scene, this is my scene, and things could get really crowded. So how do I sort of like have a list of everything that in my viewport should be, and you have Scene Explorer. Clicking that, you're gonna have this, and you would notice that this has a list of literally everything in your viewport. Now, which brings up the idea of putting labels on your object. So don't just create tons and tons and tons of objects. It's very it's good practice to always label your items. And how do we do that? You could just come right here. Really, this is the easiest place, because whilst you're walking you would always have access to this. So I have this cube selected, and could select this and rename it to Boxer. Of course, you want to give it a logical name just so that you do not get confused. And you would also notice that right here it's been changed. The name has changed. So in the Scene Explorer, you have these options of hiding different stuff. So if you have lines, or if I want to see just the object, I could select every other thing here and say, you know what, show me every other thing, every other list, every other item on the list that isn't an object or a geometry. Basically, I could bring this back and have the list of every shape that is in there, and also same for light. Unfortunately, we do not have any light in our scene. In the same sense of most other softwares, the eye you see here means that you could hide such item. Now you are hiding it basically in place. It stays exactly where it is, only that you've hidden it from view. So I could do this for a couple of items if I notice that maybe it's heavy on my computer. at any particular point in time. So that's the Scene Explorer, and this could really have help you rather um, sort of like sort things in your scene. And in 3D also you could have layers, meaning that you could actually have groupings of different objects and stuff in a particular layer, and once you hide one layer, everything goes out at the same time. So that's the Scene Explorer, and depending on the setup you have when you install 3D Studio Max, you could actually have this docked somewhere within your software, and you could also undock it. I'm just saying that you could already have it by default, depending on the setup you had selected, maybe as a designer rather, or what other option was there? I can't remember. All right, so moving forward, let's see now. One of the few important things is the autosave. Now, before I jump into the autosave, if this is your first time on this channel, please hit the subscribe button. It takes just about a second, and it's somewhere at the bottom of your screen. Just hit the subscribe and hit the bell icon also. This allows you to know when, this notifies you basically when a new video pops in. All right, back to the software. I was talking about autosave, and this kind of like is one of the few things I really go to adjust the moment I start using the software. So I could jump into customize right here at the bottom. You have preferences, and for that to pop up. So inside 500 there. All right, so you could actually set the amount of undo. So you could, this just means I could undo 100 times. Now it's very important to take note that this actually has impact on your RAM, because everything, this particular part is also stored on your RAM. So you want to make sure you do not crank this too high, just so that it doesn't impact on your system, especially if your system doesn't have that much resources. Now the thing is, this is the preference, and usually in the preference there are a whole lot of things you could play around. So I've shown you where it is. All you have to do is go through each tab and each of the menus to, I don't know, do whatever it is you want to do. So coming to files, the file tab, you have auto backup. You want to enable this, and you have number of backup files. You could adjust this up or down. Now take note also, this impacts the amount of storage you have. So if your scene, for example, is 1 gig, like one file of your scene or of your 3D Max project is 1 gigabyte per file, having 10 of your backup files means that you're gonna have 100 gigs. So that's 10 by 10. You're gonna have 100 gigs at every time being sorry, did I say 100? 1 gigabyte, so by 10, so that's 10 gig being consumed just by auto backup. Now you also want to adjust the backup interval. This does not look like I've even touched it at all. I usually like my backup intervals to be a little bit slimmer, so you could adjust this to anything you want. Of course, when it's doing that saving, notice it anyway. So that's kind of like one of the things I really come to do in here, and there are a couple of other things, but for now I'm fine. All right, so I'm gonna hit OK there, and next we're gonna touch on basic animation. So how do you animate stuff within 3D? How do you say animate this ball to move? Let's say bounce. So I'm going to hit the Z key, Z key, Z. So I'm gonna shift this a little bit back and place this right here. So I'm going to make sure it's still on the plane from the top viewport, like so. So what do I want to do now? How do you animate? Animation, basically you do this by creating keyframes. And what are keyframes? But to put this quite simply, keyframes is just saying at this point, at point 0, the ball is right here, and after 1 minute the ball is right here. So need one keyframe, and at this point I'm going to create the ball to bounce. And before I start creating the keyframes, this is kind of like a frame count. So this is frame 0 all the way to frame 100, and I'll show you how to animate first. So before I come to you determining how to consider how many frames you want to use. Okay, so to create a keyframe, there's this guy right here which says auto key. I'm going to hit that, and I'd like to set a key right here. So to do that, I'm going to use the set key and just click this right here, and I have a keyframe. And if you really look close, at this stuff that is marked here, you would notice the red, green, and blue. If you look at the gizmo, you would also notice red, green, and blue, which is sort of like indicating that it's animating all the axes basically. And it's not it's not constrained to just animating the axis. Basically anything you do to this item right now is going to be animating. So whilst I have this auto key on, I'm going to come to say 10 frames. I'm going to take this up right here, and I'm going to jump to frame 20 and bring this down. And if I drag backwards, you would notice this. So I could repeat the process. It's down, I jump to 30, take it up again, jump to 40, bring it down. I'm going to jump to 50, take it up, and I'm going to jump to 60. And just to show you that everything I'm doing to this is going to be animated, I'm going to squash this guy. The only problem with what I'm doing right now is if you notice my key right here, you will notice that it's been red. So only one thing has been animated throughout. What it's just saying is I did not animate that squash all through, but just when I got to this point. So to make this a little bit easy, I'm going to undo. I'm going to scale slightly here and squash it here, and I'm going to take it all the way down right here and from my perspective, you can see it's flat. So yep, I'm going to scale this. And you can see that it's also scaling over time. Scale it up. Down here, scale it down. So I'm just playing around, really. That's how to animate. It's not complex. It's not more than this. As long as you can change a value, you can animate it. So if you do not want to use the auto key, you could literally set keyframes yourself. I'm going to do this and set a keyframe, and that's it. Notice that now I'm just going to undo. Set the keyframe. I'm going to take this up. Set the keyframe. I'm going to change this. Nope. Scale this value. So this is also as a result of me not setting that value all throughout. So just going to undo that so that I don't confuse you out of this simple basic animation tutorial. Anyway, so that's how to move things around or animate them. And if you want to, using the auto key is kind of like one of the few simple ways of doing this. If you want to do this for a text, I could come into this creation panel, and under creation panel, shapes, text. I'm going to put the text here. It says max text, and you can come under the modify panel and change this to anything you want. So I have 28 there. I'm going to drop down this modifier list and add an extrude modifier. Extrude, give it some amount, and I could animate this. It could be from this view, for example, and now whatever you did to the other objects, as long as they're not linked together, does not affect any other thing. So it's just you animating per object. So auto key, go to all the way to 0. Set my very start and initial key, and I'm going to go to 15 and bring this up to this point, and if I scroll backwards, you see that moves. And I could also spin this around, let's say up, spin, and spin backwards, and it could go back, hit this guy and drop. And that's that. And that's how to start making things go crazy in your 3D scene. So we're getting to the point where you're wondering, how do you take out the objects or the animations you've made? So make sure you always disable this guy whenever it's not in use. before I'm going to show you how to export, I think it's also important I show you how to add some materials. And how do you do that? You hit this brings up the material window. You could dock this if you want to. So I'm going to add a basic material to this guy, and it looks black. And I just pick this and I drop this here. So if you want to modify that material, what you could do is from this same window, you have your color picker here. I'm going to select it and select this guy, and this brings out that particular material. So I'm going to use my middle mouse button to pan this. If I double click on this, it gives me all these options. The primary color is the base color, while the primary texture or material is going to be you could pick the map right here by selecting something really. So yeah, that's how to get around creating stuff. And this is you could play around these guys really. And to you render your viewport, you want to render your viewport by hitting F9, and F9 should render the active or the selected viewport. So oh nope, first of all you want to know about F10. F10 brings up your render window, no, not render window, your render setup windows. So it says view to render. I'm just going to select perspective, or you don't really have to select perspective right there. All you have to do is click it right here, and you will notice that it's changed or updated basically. You could minimize this and hit F9, and F9 will render whatever view you've selected. So I'm just going to bring this back up. And you have your front. I want my perspective. I'm just going to render. You could click the render right here, and once you do that, it's going to do this for you. And yeah, that's it. Once you hit F9, now that you've rendered that part once, or that viewpoint once, it to continue rendering the same view every time you render something. And of course you can always change the view you want it to render. I'm going to change the background by hitting 8, and that brings me the environment window. I'm going to change this background color to white. Hit OK. I'm going to close that, and if I hit F9 again, now you have white background. So just keep exploring and playing around, and you would find out more. So how do you export? So your render window, you have common parameters, time, output. Now I was gonna mention, how do you decide how many frames apart to set your keyframes? Well, you want to time it. So how do you time it? Natively PAL uses 25 frames per second. So for every second you have 0 to 25, 25 to 50, and so on. NTSC makes use of 30, and also power makes use of 25 or 50. And you could really just decide how many seconds you want for your animation. So this by power standard 0 to 100 gives you 4 seconds. So this is 4 seconds of animation. So you could decide here to render a single frame, which I've been doing. You could decide to render active time segment. So this is the active time segment from 0 all the way to 100. Or you could select a range. A range now that's 0 to 100, or any figure you choose. You could also make selections of portions within your timeline that you want to render out. That's for the timing. Now, area to render, do you want to render a view or selection or a cropped portion, and so on and so forth. So you just leave it by default and render out the view. This is for the resolution. What's the resolution of what you want to render out? By default is 720p. Oh, sorry, 720. Too much camera and streaming. All right. Just as a rule, always select force two-sided whenever you get into this menu before you render out. And finally, I'm going to leave every other thing for now and jump straight to render output. Once you select your file, you have to select where you want to render it to. I mean, like folder where in your system you want to save your render. Of course, you want to give it a name and format, AVI and PNG. If you select any image format for your render output, what it will do is to render a sequence of images. So if you're rendering a 4 seconds video, which is 0 to 100, AVI will give you a 4 seconds video, while any image format will give you frames or images, if you may. So that would be 100 images at the end of your render. So that's that. And once you've set all that, all you have to do is make sure you select the view you want to select, that you want to render rather. And in this case is the perspective which is selected, and all you have to do is hit render. Once you hit render, it's going to do all that rendering process and save everything into a folder. So this is me running you through how to do, basically starting you up really, starting you up in 3D Studio Max, and you could from this point start creating stuff and start exploring. And there are other videos that I have done, and of course there would also be more coming up over time, and this should sort of like assist you jump around a little bit more easily. And another reason for me to do this video is in case